Hello and welcome to this episode of Focus On. My name is Mosepele. Today's event saw a gathering of South Africa's sharpest minds hosted at the Houghton Hotel in Johannesburg. Artificial intelligence, power and policy, and in-depth economic insights were some of the conversations that were had today. On this episode, we spoke to two instrumental players involved in shaping South Africa's economic future. You come off of a panel discussing lengthy and extensively about the impact of artificial intelligence on the African continent. So I'd like to begin at the top. Within your field of expertise, what is the AI picture currently in Africa?
Okay, so I think that the most important one for 2025 in terms of AI is we're moving from generative AI, which most people know as your co-pilot, your ChatGPT that just helps you with things, to agentic AI, so your AI agents. So you're going to hear a lot more about AI agents. And AI agents or agentic AI is what you can embed into a business system. So for entrepreneurs, for smaller businesses, that's very, very significant because it can take all of the admin costs and the processing out of your hands, and you can focus on your growing your business. So if you look at the rest of Africa, there's always a kind of a narrative of lack of resources, lack of financing. Agentic AI will enable you to run a business more effectively without that cost. So very simply put, I think it'll enable businesses in Africa to leapfrog their counterparts in the Western world. Yeah.
Which then would be a great tool to then solve some of the issues that African governments or African countries face within the realm of education and employment. But I really want to stay particularly towards the mention of how the different uses of artificial intelligence will benefit different stakeholders. Do you feel the current approach or the current environment is inclusive of all Africans who would then like to harness this tool?
At the moment, I don't think it's inclusive. There's so many different threads about that. So it's not inclusive in terms of the large language models that AI learns from. Those are very, very kind of Western. It doesn't really look at, say, indigenous languages or the global South. So it doesn't get that information from there, and that's a big problem of how to solve problems within the global South, because it's not learning from those models. I think in terms of inclusiveness, I think we're looking at we're looking at business or the world of work in terms of, say, corporate work that we do. And what came out of the panel is, you've got to think about, say, a farmer who is planting a crop, but using AI to measure what the soil fertility is, what rainfall patterns are, what happens when there's extreme weather conditions with climate. That application of AI can be used to somebody or some sectors that traditionally you wouldn't think would use AI. So we really have to expand our thinking of who AI can benefit.
But also, what is the numbers within not only the access to this tool, but also the adoption of it?
Yeah, I think there's, because AI has come so quickly and has advanced so fast, there's a danger of just kind of trying to catch our breath all the time and not really sort of understanding what it really is. And if you look at the future of work, it's yes, I'm a big believer that there is going to be a loss of jobs, because there is what they call an AI first policy with a lot of companies, that they won't retrench, but they will replace the jobs with AI. But it's also how you understand how to work AI. So it's a little bit of, yes, I might lose my job, but it's also I will be able to find opportunities if I learn how to use and apply AI. So the people who are going to learn the application of AI are going to be the ones that are going to get progress in their careers as well.
And staying on the topic on the future of work, there was also mention on how the upskilling or reskilling of people is something that organizations cannot avoid. So looking at education and the kind of traditional approach on how education has been structured, are they progressive movements there?
Yes, so it's a long and hard road that I go on with this, and I knock heads with a lot of people, especially educators, who actually also realize that the model specifically of higher education is not suited to a 21st century AI world. The 4-year base degree in many cases, or the academic pathway to finding a career or entry into that career is kind of starting to be eroded from the feet, from your foundations as well. So I'm not saying that degrees are not relevant, but what I'm saying is degrees are not the only way to get into a career path. And we're seeing it with our studies at Flux, with a sort of your Generation Alphas, those are your preteens, your Gen Zs, the way in which they get into work and what the future of work or the future of jobs starts requiring are a collective of hybrid skills. So on the panel I mentioned the World Economic Forum concept of micro-credentials, where you get short courses, but you get they call it a digital backpack of very varied skills. And for me, that is what companies, even if they don't realize it now, are going to want in the people that they recruit, because you can be more nimble and you can work in very, very different departments when eventually the silos of old corporations start crumbling.
We officially wrapped up today's program, and you just come off a one-on-one interview, just basically giving a map and lay of the land on some of South Africa's most pressing economic issues. So I bring to you a question on, in this current environment, whether globally or locally, where there's a lot of change, whether it be trade and people, and in essence how we all interact with each other. As you stand in the segue between people and profit, how do you then, navigate the space as an economist?
It's a very important question, because we are at a time now where so much is being questioned, right, in terms of trade relationships, in terms of cooperation between nations. And so I think as a developing economy, we're feeling very vulnerable. And I think the private sector naturally will also be thinking about how to survive in this context. And yet at the same time, when thinking about survival, you've also got to have a strategy that looks to the future. So we can't have knee-jerk reactions that mean that, for instance, as has sometimes been raised, that we abandon our focus on inclusive growth and say that we will no longer think about transformation, we will no longer think about poverty reduction. It's important we keep all of these goals in mind, even though we navigate a very difficult economic environment. From a trade perspective, of course, as South Africa, we have trade relations across the board, not just with the United States, and we obviously know the challenges that the United States, in terms of its new trade policy, has imposed on the rest of the world. But we've also got relationships with Europe, very long-standing relationships. We've got relationships with China, the rest of the continent, the global south. So I think it's also important, as we face this moment, to also think about how we deepen ties more broadly to enable us to navigate this moment.
And I still want to stay on the topic. There was earlier mention of the GNU and also the lead up to the G20 moment. And as the global south and Africa by extension is gaining prominence and their voice on the global stage, how would you advise the African government to take advantage of this position now?
Yeah, I think South Africa is an opportune moment for our presidency to really bring to the fore issues of global development that mean that we raise the contribution and participation of the African continent in the global economy. We know we only get about 3% of global FDI as the African continent. We know that our levels of economic integration are very low, and that we export very little that is manufactured or value added. And I think now, taking this moment, not just with South Africa's G20 presidency, but with the African Union being, having a seat at the G20 table to surface these issues. I think it's also important the way we have put in front and center issues around the cost of capital and the way risk perceptions make it more difficult to build infrastructure in the African continent, for instance. We've really put those questions to the forefront so that we bring to the financial community and economic stakeholders the real opportunities that the African continent presents, and also a realistic understanding of risk that is not driven by hyperbole and exaggeration, but that really looks at a continent with real potential.
Sure, and I also really want to touch on collaboration and partnerships. And while they're the mainstay or the golden thread of today's event is an inclusive approach towards growing and moving forward, within the scope or in the realm of triple Ps and in essence coming together to solve one core problem. What do you think is needed now to strengthen greater collaboration within all stakeholders?
Yeah, I think we saw it with how we resolved or are resolving the energy crisis with private sector investing more and being allowed to invest more in infrastructure, particularly through renewable energy, but also going forward through transmission infrastructure. We're starting to see some of those conversations happening in the water sector with the Water Partnerships Office kicking into gear, which would help local governments really think about their role as a water authority versus service providers that could come from the private sector and achieve the goals of those local authorities. So I think across various sectors, logistics, a similar partnership is happening. Partnerships are difficult because people come from different interests, different understandings of issues, and so I think the pace of implementation is not as fast as we would want it to be, but I think we're past that hurdle where the idea of partnership is not being questioned anymore, but we just have issues around how do we make it mutually beneficial. But I think we're seeing that there is no sector in society or in the economy that has all the answers, all the resources. We have to work together to solving common problems.
And lastly, I'd really like to touch on the digital economy. You made mention in terms of policy and regulation. The digital economy kind of doesn't always receive the attention that it deserves. Within this space, as South Africa and Africa is keeping abreast of the changes in the world order, how can we prioritize digitalization on the African continent?
I think we'd started, if I think back of my time in presidency with Operation Vulindlela, to think about, releasing spectrum to telecoms providers, which had been a long-standing issue. And so that is being resolved. I think thinking around carefully how we roll out public digital infrastructure, particularly to marginalized communities. We also have to think about the affordability of services. And so there have been various regulatory interventions to try to achieve that goal. But once again, I think partnerships are important so that it's not punitive and it's not top-down, but it's a collaborative solution.
And that's how we wrap up this episode of Focus On at the Houghton Hotel in Johannesburg. From me, Mosepele, and the rest of the CNBC Africa team, it's goodbye for now.